So, welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, at Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make resources such as books and courses and information for other potters who want to be more eco-conscious in their pottery practice but maybe don't know where to start or can't find out the information they need. So that's what this podcast is all about. It's about sharing everything I've learned along my eco-conscious pottery journey with you, and I can't wait to get started. So let's go. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about how to design pottery for the environment and what this is and all the things you can think about in terms of like when you're designing your pottery, and yeah, and all the different kind of different areas, different opportunities for potters really in terms of designing their pottery for the environment. Okay, so firstly, what is design for the environment in pottery? Well, okay, basically, designing for the environment means designing a product to kind of encapsulate, like to take account of its environmental impact, like holistically from like um, like the design process, the making process, the kind of raw materials that go into it, and then how it's used, and then also then how it's disposed of. So it's like its whole life cycle basically. It's about understanding that product and its impact on the environment and trying to minimize that. Okay, so it's trying to design that product to have the minimum impact on the environment. Okay, so in pottery, this can be like, yeah, sometimes you think, "Oh, this could be, like, a little bit tricky," because the fact that, like, we can't once you've made pottery, we don't really can't really recycle it, like, back into, clay or back into those raw materials. But there are so many things that we can do to actually kind of design our pottery for the environment, like, before it's fired, basically. Yeah, so let's go through those in this episode. Yeah, getting excited because there's so many to tell you about. But we'll go through each one, and I'll just tell you about it. So, um, okay, firstly to say, like, I actually have designed my pottery for the environment from the kind of all aspects of it, from like kind of the materials that have gone into it, and also like the processes I've used to make it, and like the design of all the pottery and stuff. And like I did so much research to try and get my pottery to be like the absolute minimum environmental impact. And what I did was I then put that research into two books that are available from the Oxford Clay website. So if you are listening to this and you think, "Oh, I want to know like more information," because we'll sort of do a like a summary version in this episode today. But if you want to know like more like all the detailed information, it's in two books. So the first one is called Eco-Friendly Pottery: 30 Simple Ways to Make Your Pottery Practice More Ethical and Sustainable. Um, yeah. And then we've got eco-conscious pottery glazing. Make your own pottery glazes with minimal harm to humans, animals, and the environment. So I would say eco-conscious pottery glazing is more kind of materials focused, and then eco-friendly pottery is kind of it's got some material stuff in there, but it's also got like quite a lot of stuff about like kind of pottery making practices and stuff in there as well. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing to think about is creating yourself a kind of framework. So if you're starting from scratch, you're like, I want to make pottery, but I want to make pottery that's got like minimum impact on the environment. Where do I even start? What I did was I basically did lots of research, and then created a kind of framework for myself where I then made my pottery from the practices and the raw materials, the ingredients within that framework. So the framework for me consisted of materials, so like what raw materials I was using. It consisted of the design features of the actual thing I was making, and then also the pottery making practices. So we'll go through each one of these in turn. Okay, so first of all, materials. So, what I was looking for with materials was I wanted to know whether that material, that pottery material, was from a single source. Okay, so if it's from a single source, it means that you can tell kind of like, you know, how that material is mined, where it's mined. You kind of know the regulatory framework in which, it's being mined under. So if materials are mixed, so some pottery materials are more prone to kind of, being mined in different areas and mixed and then transported internationally than others. So, for example, something like cobalt, something like talc, those two materials are very internationally they're very internationally mixed, and they come from different regions of the world, and then they're mixed, and then they're sold. So it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to tell where that material's come from and to know that it's coming from an area with a robust regulatory framework. So that's what I look for. Is it coming from a single source? So next, I looked at like whether what was, like I said, the regulatory framework of that area. So, do they have robust legislation designed to protect the environment? So, obviously, mining a material is causing environmental destruction, when it's actually mined from the earth. And, energy is being used to mine that material as well. But, like, what are the protections that have been put in place by, say, like the government of that region to protect the environment as far as possible? And what are the sanctions that that government can then place on companies, for example, maybe mining companies that perhaps breach those regulations? So that's what I'm looking for there as well. The next thing I looked at was like the energy mix of that region. So some regions of the world have like they rely a lot on fossil fuels, whereas other regions are much more reliant on their energy sources from their energy mix in that country is from renewable sources of electricity. And so, mining takes a lot of energy, especially mining metal oxides, to create commercial metal oxides. Mining metal ores takes a huge amount of energy and creates a lot of pollution. So, by looking at the energy mix of a country, again, that's an indication of like the impact that mining that material has had on the environment. So, like if, for example, it relies very heavily on fossil fuels, say that could potentially create like more environmental harm than another type of energy mix, which has like more renewable energy in, for example. Um, okay, the next thing I look at is how local is that material to me. Okay, so if you think about like pottery materials, they come from like all over the world, but we can like have the power as potters to select the materials that we want to, and make our pottery out of that. From so we can select materials that are very like very local to us. So, for example, in my pottery clay, I use ball clays and china clay from England, whereas I could potentially use ball clays or china clay from other parts of the world. But the fact that like there is some available in England is fantastic from a kind of point of view of cutting down like the haulage of that material. It's like to get to me and also to get to the pottery supplier in the first place. It's mined, it goes to the pottery supplier, which is also in the UK, and then I can get that pottery material to me also in the UK. So it's like it's cutting down the kind of CO2 emissions and the energy used for haulage of that material. So I look for localness, which I didn't know if it was a word, but I just put localness. And then, yeah, and then I also think about like the harm that that material has caused. So I mentioned this earlier just briefly, but say for example, how much energy does that material need to get mined? Some for example, commercial metal oxides, they come originally from metal ore, and because metal ore is declining in the quality of the ore grade, the grading of the ore, mining companies are having to mine like kind of deeper, and it's taking even more energy to get that metal ore out of the ground. So we can think about metal oxides and just think, do we want to be using those in our pottery practice just because of the fact that potentially is causing, say, like more environmental harm than like another pottery material? So that's the way that's the way I was sort of thinking about that. Okay, so the next thing to think about is okay. The next thing to think about is like in terms of like the materials. This is the kind of these are the things I thought about when I was thinking like what do I include in my actual pottery. So I was thinking about whether I wanted to use commercial metal oxide. I decided like no. So I actually make my own metal oxides from recycled copper and iron. And then I also thought about like what kind of glaze I wanted to make. So I actually make a glaze from a recycled wood ash. So it's recycled from people heating their homes. I collect the ash as a waste product, and then 40% of the glaze that I use in my pottery is actually made from that recycled ash. So it's kind of like a waste product. And then yeah, I was saying to you about the clays that I use clay from like as local as possible in, to me in the UK. And also I have selected the other ingredients I use in my clay and glaze. I have selected those to be as local as possible as well. So I use all those materials that I'm using are actually from the region of Europe. So they're as local as I can possibly get. Um, like within the framework of still needing certain materials that are maybe not necessarily available in the UK. So if they were available in the UK, I could use those, but sometimes there just aren't the mining operations. So it's like, sometimes you might have to go a tiny bit like maybe like further afield to get the material that you need. So, I'm interrupting this episode to tell you about a totally free guide I've made just for you on how to make your own pottery glaze recipe. So, if you are a total beginner to glaze making and it's something you've wanted to maybe try, but you're not really sure where to start, this guide is specifically designed to take you through all the steps you need to know from start to finish, all the ingredients you need, all the equipment you need, and also how to fire your pottery glaze at the end. So, even if you're not new to glaze making and you just want a pottery glaze recipe that's very simple and specifically made with eco conscious ingredients, then this guide is also for you. So, you can get the guide in the show notes, there's a link, but also you can go on to the Oxford Clay website at www.oxfordclay.co.uk/resources for potters. Okay, let's go back to the episode. Okay, so the next part of the framework is design features. Okay, so this is thinking about the design, the intrinsic design of your pottery, and whether by designing a pottery in a certain way, you can lessen its impact on the environment. Okay, so the things I think about when I'm thinking about this are um, I want to make sure that my pottery is that I'm wasting that I've got the least wastage possible. Okay, so this could look like, for example, a particular design of pot, which is say like always cracking at the bisqueware stage. Ugh, cracking in pottery, so annoying. So yeah, I also yeah to tell you about like I look also for like things like warping and stuff. So I just wanted to tell you about this thing that I was basically making this design of cup, and I honestly I was losing about who 50% of all the cups, the mugs, to it was a slip cast mug, and every time I fired it, the glaze firing stage, there would be warping. From about 50% of the cups would warp, and it was so frustrating. So in the end I'd actually just stopped making that design because I think it was something intrinsic to the shape of that mug that meant that it was pulling it out of shape, and it meant that I was losing so much, and that's such a waste, especially at the glaze firing stage. So it's things like that, like are there things which you're losing a lot through problems, sort of almost like mechanical problems with your pot. Can you kind of just eradicate those from the process? um, yeah, another thing I thought about as well was like how the pottery fitted together in the kiln. So, rather than making like one big bowl or something where like there was a lot of wasted space around it, like in the kiln, I made like much smaller items that could like sort of tessellate a lot better in the kiln. And again, that could help me waste less. So it helped me waste less energy from kiln firings. Um, Yeah. Okay. So then we're coming on to the third part of designing for the environment in pottery, and that is practices. Okay. So your pottery making practices. Now, this is like a huge, huge area, but I'm going to just go through some things that I've thought about, because, you can make pottery in so many different ways. So that's why it's such a huge area. But essentially, it's trying to make pottery in a way that's the most environmentally friendly possible. So if you think about I don't know, all your different processes that you're doing when you're, from starting to kind of when you're, from the beginning of your pottery making process right to the end when it's fired. So it's things like, for example, the way you fire your pottery. So it could be, for example, have invested in a very energy efficient electric kiln that I power with renewable energy. Um, so, like, that helps me use the least energy possible because the kiln is very energy efficient and it does take a very long time to like cool down, but never mind. And also, renewable energy that's having like the kind of least impact on the environment in terms of like using the energy for firings. Um, and then think, I thought about things like reusing water. So, for example, I collect rainwater and I use that in my pottery. I do a technique where I save water. There's this thing called like the bucket technique, which I think is actually episode one of this podcast. It's basically me telling you about how I reuse water. And essentially, it's like taking a bucket, using the water at the top of the bucket, letting all the clay settle, and then you can pour off the water at the top, and basically you're reusing that water forever. Um, and yeah, okay. And then like another thing I thought was like not so practices like trying to again to reduce wastage in your pottery practice. So that would be things like if a pot isn't kind of like, you think, oh, you can see like a hairline crack appear or something, when it's dried, and you know that if you bisque fire it, it's probably just going to get worse. It's kind of like reclaiming it then rather than like wasting the energy in a bisque firing for that pot. So it's things like that, sort of trying to reduce the kind of wastage in your pottery. Like in throughout the making process. And obviously, things like reclaiming clay, that's really important before it's fired. And then, yeah, other things I thought about were like saving energy in the process, in pottery making process. So, some potters, for example, they want to dry work quickly, and there's things that you can use that dry work quickly, but are more environmentally friendly than say like a heat gun. So, for example, you can just use like a desk fan that just blows air over your pot, drying it. If you're trying to attach the nightmare of when you've got two different like drynesses of pot, thing you're attaching to your pot, and you want to you want to kind of like join them, want to dry a handle quickly or something. You can use a desk fan, and that's like uses massively less energy than say like a heat gun, which some people use, which is for like stripping paint and stuff. um so, okay, so another thing that I actually did in my pottery was that I took out all the animal products as well from my pottery. So, animal products can be kind of like they can kind of sneak into pottery through things like chamois leather. So, some potters use this to kind of shape their pottery like on the wheel, or there's a technique you can use where you can kind of make a flat base with chamois leather, but you can, equally just use like a cotton tea towel. That's like works really, really well. Um, and I also, yeah, they can also be animal fur in like paintbrushes. So I use like synthetic makeup brushes for my pottery. You can also get synthetic paintbrushes as well, artist paintbrushes. But if you're painting on glaze, that's definitely something that I have like intentionally done. I've basically made sure that all the brushes I use are synthetic rather than animal hair. And then also, if you're like some kind of glazes will contain animal products in the sense that they might have bone ash in. So these are usually sort of bovine bones which are ground into a powder, and bone ash has been added to clays and glazes for hundreds of years if you think about like bone china. But we don't necessarily need to make pottery with bone ash. Can yeah, there's loads of recipes that don't have it. So yeah, there could be some kind of glazes that you might be using, maybe like a commercial glaze that potentially has that ingredient in if you're not making your own glaze. Um, yeah. So that's something to think about too. Okay, so gosh, what like whistle stops tour through how to design pottery for the environment. And like I said, if you want any more information on just just loads of stuff you can do basically to design pottery for the environment. So many things you can do. So many, different ingredients you can use are, more environmentally friendly than others. If you're not sure about ingredients, you want like a guide about like, what should I be using or how to make your own metal oxides, then eco-conscious pottery glazing and eco-friendly pottery. They're both, yeah, both of those books are available on the Oxoclay website. Everything I know is basically in those books. And then if you want to know more about like ash glazing as well, I got another two books on the Oxoclay website about ash glazing, which are kind of which is so cool. I love ash glazing, and so that's kind of like just using plants basically. Making them into ash, and then, like I said, there's a fantastic glaze recipe in those two books, which is 40% ash. So you can, yeah, experiment with ash glazing. Um, yeah, okay. So, right, another thing to say, just right at the end, is that you don't have to like do all of these things in your pottery. Obviously, if you're trying to design for the environment, you're like, I must design for the environment. It's got to be like the perfect pot, with like no negative impact on the environment at all. But like, this is probably impossible to be honest with you as a potter because we are using raw materials. These raw materials need to be mined from the earth. So they're going to have some kind of environmental impact just from that process. Um, but yeah, there are so many things we can do. And yeah, like even if we just do one thing or, you just have a look and you just even just kind of understanding more about our pottery and its environmental impact. It's like we don't have to do all of this stuff. We can just do one small thing, and that does make a difference. We can all make a difference. So yeah, I just wanted to let you know that if you wanted to design for the environment, those are the kind of things that I have thought about when I've been designing my pottery. And yeah, it's been so nice to talk to you about this, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. And yeah, until then, wishing you very happy potting, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye. Oh, yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you're interested to learn more about eco conscious pottery or making your pottery more eco conscious and sustainable, there's so much for you on the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. I can't wait to see you there.